players gather to cast powerful spells, some of the oldest and most powerful in the history of Magic the Gathering. Oko, Uro, Dreadhorde Arcanist, and Occam's Astrolabe. Battling head-to-head in brutal combat, they all have one thing in common: to uphold their legacy in the search for eternal glory.
The Eternal Glory podcast is brought to you by the minds behind BoshNRoll on YouTube, Thraben University, and theepicstorm.com.
Episode 40 of the Eternal Glory podcast, The Cost of Selection. I'm Phil Gallagher, joined by Bryant Cook and Brian Coval. How are you all doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good, and realizing that this is episode 40, something else important to me turned 40 this week, and it's Calvin Hodges. If you know him, he's the vendor at Black Magic Gaming. He's at every GP, every Star City. He is the fucking dude, and happy 40th birthday, Calvin.
All right, Brian, I guess since you're talking, we'll start with you. What's going on in your life?
Well, my COVIDcation is over. Coronacation, whatever you want to call it. All jokes aside, I've been summoned back to work. We were told that we'd get 2 weeks from the point where my county was no longer in a severe rate of spread. My county is still in a severe rate of spread, but Pennsylvania, the governor, and our Dr. General, whatever that position's actually called, it's not Dr. General, Tom Wolfe and Rachel Levine, they decided that elementary schools and particularly impacted populations like special ed, which is what I work in, should be back in school. Like basically the damage done by those populations missing that much school is worse than the risk of COVID, that according to some calculation they've done. And because the rules changed, we didn't get the 2-week warning. We were told on Friday, be back to work Wednesday morning. It's currently Tuesday night, so I'm waking up at 5:15 for the first time in 2 months tomorrow morning. So I'm super stoked for that. The good news is teachers are in vaccine round 1B, at least in Pennsylvania. I don't know if these are national waves or just states run them, but 1B is teachers, and I figured I'd be in the teacher range. But medical clinicians are 1A. And apparently my job is classified as a 1A job because behavior support is managed by the Board of Medicine in Pennsylvania. So as a behavior analyst, I'm in the first wave. My girlfriend who I live with and is a teacher, she's in wave B. But I've already gotten an email that's like, you can get this, confirm that you want it. And I did that. So information to be determined, but it looks like I'm getting vaccinated sooner than later.
Yeah. On that note, I am in 1B in my state, North Carolina, and I got my first dose on Sunday, which is super cool. So, come the end of the month, I'll get my second dose of it and, likely never get COVID.
When do we think that web designers will get their COVID shots? 2022, 2023, somewhere in that range?
You guys can live in your houses and work there just fine. You don't need to return to society. You're good. I'll take yours also.
For our listeners out there, there's a lot of really bad information about vaccines running around. Don't get your information on vaccines from people like us, but please do your research and figure out whether or not it's a good idea for you to get a vaccine rather than listen to someone in a Facebook group tell you what you should do. Just that's my way of plugging the vaccine without the endorsement coming from me directly.
Yeah, our CEO of our company, she has arranged a bunch of vaccine information support groups that you can show up if you have questions or concerns about what a vaccine means for you, which is great. But right above that email was the email offering me the vaccine, and I basically instantly replied and said, "Slam it in my veins." So, quite literally. And so I'm in. Working in autism support especially, I get all sorts of anti-vax nonsense coming to my doorstep that I have to navigate. And Those anti-vaxxer nonsense maniacs are also paying the tuition for the kids to be there, so I have to navigate it much more gently than I want to. But this is different. I will easily lead by example. I have all my other vaccines. I'm not going to stop now. And I don't have autism because they're not related.
As someone who is immunocompromised and who has essentially been hiding in the house for the last year, the thought that I might be able to actually go out and do something and not be super afraid is such a relief.
Yeah, I can't even imagine how you feel, because I have felt like fear to leave the house this whole time, and I'm not immunocompromised. Like, I'm just a normal person, like normal, healthy age. Like, I would for sure just easily survive COVID. Like, I'm in that range, but I also don't want it. And one of my closest friends got it. She's been in lockdown this whole time too. She has a roommate and a boyfriend, and goes grocery shopping, and those 3 leaks resulted in all 3 of them getting COVID. We don't know who got it first, but it's tough to lock down the ship. If I didn't live with my girlfriend, I would probably have to have chosen to not see her or get COVID. It has been tough. I'm excited to be vaccinated, and hopefully that's a step in the right direction. However, now we're learning that Britain and it's creeped over to France are being ravaged by a new strain of COVID. So let's see where that goes. Can't even wait. Are we going to talk about COVID for 2 hours tonight?
No.
Okay.
All right.
Then I will talk about in brighter news, which is also grim and dangerous. I'm watching Raised by Wolves, which is a show on HBO Max. It's about it's directed by Ridley Scott. It's like a sci-fi that has a little toe in horror, but it's mostly sci-fi. And it's these 2 androids get jettisoned into space with human embryos in a spaceship, and they're expected to incubate and raise these embryos and create a new human society because Earth was destroyed by religious wars. And these robots are to raise these human embryos as atheists to cure the biggest problem in human society, which is religion, which led to the death of Earth. And 12 years after they arrive or something, a ship full of religious zealots arrives at the same planet with the same plan to fix all the problems of Earth, which is to have no atheists. And it's sort of this literally science versus God open warfare with these 2 cult-like mini societies, and it's really good. I'm only 5 or 6 episodes in, but I'm really into it so far.
On my end, I am really unsure about what the rest of my school year looks like now. I had been I am immunocompromised, so I was convinced I would be working from home from the rest of the year, and that was the accommodation. But now I'm getting vaccinated, so I think it takes 2 weeks after your second dose for you to have immunity. But that means mid-February, I could potentially be going back into work again. So I have no idea what my next couple of months looks like. And that's not bad, but it's also kind of stressful because it's when do I know what this looks like? We're opening up a new school building. Are we bringing more of the students back? What's the governor going to say? Are things going to change once we get a new president? I have so many questions that I don't have answers to right now.
Well, I think one of those questions will be answered in roughly 8 days, right? 6 days?
Is that all? I don't know anymore. I don't think I have the oomph to do coronavirus followed by the potential downfall of American democracy in the same episode. So let's let that one go. Bryant, what are you doing?
Good call.
Well, going back to the health thing, this was probably 3 months ago, but I had, I'll call it a visual panic attack. I was working on my computer and my peripherals got really black and all of a sudden I couldn't focus. And it lasted for about 40 minutes and I sort of freaked out. And, I got a drink of water, took some Advil, and half an hour later, I laid down for a little bit. It was gone. It happened again the next day and the day after that, and then didn't happen for a month. And I was telling a coworker about it. They're like, you need to go to the doctor. I was like, what? It hasn't happened. They're like, go to the doctor. Like, I will tell your boss. Like, we need your eyes. You're a web designer. And I was like, eh. And then my boss is like, you should probably go to the doctor. You have healthcare. Just go. So I haven't been to the doctor, honestly, in years, like 5 or 6 years. I just go, I don't know. I don't go to the doctor. So I was like nervous for like them drawing my blood and like, I don't know. I'm a 31-year-old guy. I haven't been to the doctor since like my parents' healthcare ran out because, that's what happens when you turn 26. And I was like, oh, they're going to like find out that I have diabetes or cancer or something and my life's just going to be over. And I was like really nervous about it. And they're just like, nah, you're healthy as a horse. Like you'll be fine. Also, like, you don't have coronavirus. And I just like none of those things is what I thought was going to be told to me.
Yeah, I've definitely learned, like, I'm like you. I don't go to the doctor unless I'm like on the verge of death. And my girlfriend is the type of person who's like, oh, my right shoulder is a little sore. I'm going to book a chiropractic appointment immediately. Or like, I woke up with a little bit of a sniffle. I'll see if I can get into our PCP. I'm just like, what is wrong with you? Chill out. You're fine. But like, I'm the type of person who like, I could be like, bleeding out of every orifice and just like, I think it'll go away. Just let me sleep it off. But like, I've been going more recently because my girlfriend is like talking to me. I've never actually bled from every orifice. That was just an absurd example. Nobody fear for my bloody orifices. They're fine. But I have learned that the number of times where you go in and you're like, yeah, so my vision just went blurry. Like I went blind for an hour and I had to like sleep it off. And it happened 3 days in a row. It hasn't happened since. And doctors are like, oh, that's weird.
Yep, that's
you
exactly
look
what
healthy
happened.
to me. Yeah, it's such a pain in the ass. And like the alternative to that is like I have headaches all the time. They've never been diagnosed as migraines. I don't think they necessarily are migraines, but like I get like pretty regular headaches. And I told my PCP that like 2.5 years ago, and he was like, okay, I'll set you up for a CAT scan. And I was like, oh, that sounds cool. Like, let's just make sure there's no tumorous lumps up in there. Like, whatever. And then his office checked that it's covered by my insurance. Insurance signed off on it. I booked the appointment. I show up there like 3 weeks later, and they're like, okay, that'll be $325 today. And I'm like, wait, insurance approved it. They're like, yeah, they approved you to pay the copays and deductibles to get it done. And I'm like, I don't have $325 today. I'm not even sure if this is medically necessary. I'm just going to leave. And like, for our international listeners, I know there are a number of you. That's what American healthcare is like. So,
yep.
Enjoy your socialized medicine, because that's evil here.
So, other than medical stuff, I watched I watched both seasons of Titans, like the Teen Titans, but like it's edgy now because it's on HBO Max. It was so corny and campy, but I loved it. Like,
yes.
I was just so into it. And then I found out that the like side characters in like a random episode of season 1 got their own show called Doom Patrol, and I'm now watching that. I'm midway through season 2, and it's even worse, but I might love it twice as much just because I don't know anything about it. Like, I've read a bunch of the Titan stuff as a kid, and like I know a lot of it already, but I don't know nothing about Doom Patrol. Somebody's like, oh, what happens to this robot? I gotta find out. Yeah. And going back to my first point about like blurred vision or whatever, what the doctor ultimately told me was I need to get more sleep because on average I don't sleep enough at night. Well, last night I was up until 3 a.m. working on theepicstorm.com. I found out that my mobile navigation was no longer working, and I was like, I will solve this. And after like I got to 3, I'm like, I should really get some sleep. Like 5 hours probably isn't enough for tomorrow. And then I worked over my lunch break and then a little bit after work and solved the issue just before we went live. So it's fixed now, but it's had me going crazy for 8 hours.
So if Bryant goes blind and passes out during our recording tonight, that's why. We're just going to continue on without you if that happens, though.
It might actually be a better episode.
Yeah, it could be. Do you have a life alert bracelet to get help if you do pass out?
I do wear an Apple Watch, and
I can't get up.
I've been told that the Apple Watch actually records a bunch of that stuff. My boss's wife had a heart attack, and it like alerted people.
Neat.
Oh, wow. That's cool. I don't think my Fitbit does that. I think I could just like turn it onto heart rate display mode. It would say like 380, but it wouldn't actually tell anyone. Or 5. Like, what direction does a heart attack go in? Does your heart rate go up or down? I don't even know.
Couldn't tell you.
Me neither.
But that's my life update. And we're through that stuff at 15 minutes. Congratulations, guys.
Not bad.
All right. For donations, thank you once again to Henrik Korkutz for donating to the podcast. You help keep Phil Bleckman at Force of Will happy and...
Force of Phil. Force of Phil.
I knew that. Look, man, it's been a long day.
Also, Henrik, you're the real MVP. Every episode, just supporting us. We love you. Thank you.
Henrik also messaged me on Facebook once to give me some help with Breath of the Wild back when I was playing that for like 40 hours a week. And I mentioned it on the episode that I was worried about like beating Ganon because then the game would be over. And he messaged me and he's like, don't worry, there's plenty to do after you beat Ganon. Like, don't let that slow you down. And I was like, oh, sweet, thanks. So he's the GOAT.
All right. As far as feedback goes, we highlighted one very long comment and then trimmed it down into 2 smaller sub-questions. So both of these come from Bone Clock Harmony on Reddit. If we remove Dreadhorde Arcanist, isn't that only hurting one of the dominant decks? Is the argument that combo could better police Snowco with Dreadhorde Arcanist gone? So...
to flesh out this point a little bit, what he means, this was in the longer comment, but we cut it down, is that in his estimation, or their estimation, the problem decks are Rug Delver and Snowco, and that Dreadhorde Arcanist is only in one of those 2 decks when Oka's in both of them. And that's how we ended up here. So, continue, Phil.
All right. Well, to start things off, Dreadhorde Arcanist is in snow decks as well sometimes. Like, there are very new... Well, maybe not new. There are different builds of snow emerging that take the builds in different directions. Sometimes with Arcanist, sometimes with Hullbreacher, Days Undoing. That deck is not set in stone, and sometimes it picks up that card, and it's great there. There's also Dreadhorde Infect now, which has multiple trophies to its name from Fenris Cloud. And
finally, that card's doing what it's supposed to do, though. That card was designed for pump spells. We should let that version exist.
Yeah, you can decide whether or not it's a masterpiece or an abomination. That one's to the listeners. And then there's also things like it just getting rammed into decks like Doomsday, and it just being insane there as like something that lets you grind through all of your opponent's various counter spells and forces them to leave removal spells in their deck that otherwise are quite bad.
Yeah, the vintage Underworld Breach shell is mostly just a Xerox deck, and then it has this tight little combo package that adding Dreadhorde Arcanist to Legacy Doomsday kind of simulates that game plan of I have to deal with this Arcanist, they're going to draw cards, they're going to duress me, they're going to have counterspell backup, and they're threatening a combo kill at any point. And it's just, it stretches what you have to do against them pretty badly. And yeah, like, also just like, let's look at Pokepile. Like, Pokemoki has been fighting for the top of the leaderboard, challenged only by Negator 77, and it was like a late entry too. Like Pokemoki was running for a long time, and Negator was just like, you know what, I'm going to be the trophy leader again. But so Pokemoki, that's been a Dreadhorde Arcanist Uro Oko deck the whole time. Like it's not just like Rug Delver, and it gets called Pokepile, but that deck is mostly just like Rug Snowco. So it's not that DHA is only in one deck at all.
You guys failed to mention the new, and I say new, but it's the Jeskai Mentor deck. It's running, Dreadhorde Arcanist with one of the best creatures ever printed, Monastery Mentor. So, like, that deck plays like snow, but it also has, like, I don't want to say a tempo aspect, but it has Dreadhorde.
And it's real good.
That deck plays like Jund. Yeah. Well, I don't know if that deck is real good, but it is certainly a deck you can play. I did record with that. That's scheduled to release probably a couple days after this episode drops on my channel. But I will say that among Mentor decks. I don't think that's a shell that maximizes Mentor, but that shell wouldn't exist at all if Dreadhorde Arcanist wasn't a card.
Yep.
Like the idea of curving like Ponder, DHA, Mentor on 1, 2, 3. Like there's nothing else in Legacy that challenges your removals, your interaction as hard on turn 2 to make way for the turn 3 Mentor as Arcanist does.
So I would want to go back and nitpick something. The two of you were discussing Doomsday with Dreadhorde. I was talking about this with some other combo aficionados recently, and that is there's a new Doomsday list that's appeared. I believe that the primary person behind it is the famous Oops All Spells expert Jax, who decided to play 4 Personal Tutor and maximize Street Wraith. And now the deck is just ultra fast. It's very consistent. Turn 2 is you usually on turn 2 with backup. The deck's just very good. And it's the opposite strategy of these Dreadhorde Doomsday lists, because the Doomsday decks have gotten a lot slower over the last couple months. They've been adding in Baleful Strix, and then they were playing like two predict and more cantrips. And honestly, if you go back and look at it, it's the same thing that happened with Breach. Breach was designed by combo players, and then all of the Miracles players switched to Breach, and they added in a bunch of like predicts and stuff, and the deck became slower. For better or for worse, I don't know if it was like the right decision, but the Breach shell was so strong that it just didn't matter what filler cards you put in because they were going to win anyway. I don't think Doomsday is quite that good. I do think that there is a real cost to like playing Dreadhorde in your deck that had 0 targets for Lightning Bolt before. And now they're just like, well, I guess I'm going to bolt this Dreadhorde. It was a dead card previously.
Well, the original build of Dreadhorde Arcanist Doomsday, the Arcanists were in the sideboard.
Yes, predicts were made.
It's the juke. And I just recorded a league yesterday with a Grixis Luxury deck, and I played against Doomsday, and in the sideboard it was like, all right, I cut all my removal, or do I? Like, what level is this opponent on? And I decided to just commit to beating regular spell-based Doomsday and had basically no removal in the deck. And if I chose wrong, I lose. If I hedge one way or the other, then I'm soft against both builds. So it's just like a thing. Like when Splinter Twin back in Modern added Tarmogoyf, that's basically the same kind of thing, where like your opponent boards in to beat this combo, and they bring in like Combust and Rending Volley and all of this mess, and then you're just like Tarmogoyf. And it's the same kind of thing. We've seen it in a lot of combo decks. I'm sure I don't need to educate the Epic Storm master Bryant Cook about the history of combo decks, but we've seen this a lot where control decks do it too. You just pivot into some other animal that wins the game instead of the combo or your main deck plan.
I was just going to mention that. Like the first effective experience that I can honestly think of, and I say effective because it's been done for years, but this is the first deck to do it well, in my opinion, was Miracles. Like boarding into Mentors and just crashing face, and like your opponent just had like the fear in them of like, am I really supposed to side out swords? What if Mentor comes in? Because Mentor takes over a game very quickly.
Yeah, I still leave in 1 or 2 Supreme Verdicts, even if I cut most of my plows and control mirrors, just out of respect for what if. Like, they could do anything. I don't know. Like, so, yeah, the Dreadhorde Arcanist is a powerful enough card that it can get shoved into most shells and make it, and still be playable. Like, I don't know if it's good or bad. Like, I haven't tested all of these, like, Dreadhorde Arcanist infect decks, like, whatever, but the fact that you can just shove this random card into a deck, add a color to a deck for this random card, no less, and it's still playable and possibly even good, is a sign of how high the bar is on that one.
So there's a part 2 to this question. I guess I'll read it. Couldn't you just as easily argue that with Oko gone, Chalice decks could now help police Dreadhorde Arcanist? To help me, this argument has the added benefit of, quote, unlocking a bunch of decks that Oko really oppresses, which also leads into the next point.
So my challenge there would be, are Chalice decks actually good against Dreadhorde Arcanist decks? And I think that is a real question, because conceptually you would go and think, yes, Chalice of the Void is great against them because it goes and shuts off all of the cantrips coming back from the graveyard. While that's true, all of those decks are also like 6 or 7 Force of Will decks, that also play some other sort of interaction. And if it's not Oko, they might go back to something like Brazen Borrower.
Or Uro. Like, if Oko leaves, I'm telling you right now, Uro will be just slotted right into these decks. Daniel Goschel top-aided the Legacy Showcase with Uros. Like, it's not some, like, crazy stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, I mean, Uro is obviously a very different card outside of its mana cost to Oko, and the effect on the format is totally different. But yeah, like those, if you don't have to worry about Oko anymore, the Dreadhorde Arcanist decks are just going to pile up on Brazen Borrowers and Abrades and like things that line up well against the things that line up well against them. And like I think the argument itself of like, this kind of sounds to me like, sure, Dreadhorde Arcanist is a problem, but with Oko gone, we can answer it with Chalice. Or we could skip the middleman and just remove Dreadhorde Arcanist. Like, that's sort of what this lands on for me.
Also, the prison side of Red Prison sucks right now. It's maybe the worst that it's ever been, and that's why so many of the Red Prison builds are playing things like Fireflux Squad and P&K and Anji's Ravager that like haven't seen too much play in like the year preceding it. And it's just because if you want to be playing those decks, just get people dead, stop trying to answer their stuff, stop trying to lock them out, because it's not working.
I'm reading Fireflux Squad for the first time right now, live on as we're recording.
Do you want to?
Well, Phil, I think that's like part of what you're describing is like you used to be able to lock people out. You could pick a point of attack with a prison deck or discard spells and then focus on that. Everything has been pushed so far the last couple of years where that's just really difficult to do. Like, you're supposed to like deny your opponent mana, but then there's Arkham's Astrolabe. Well, maybe you Trinisphere them. There's Oko. Karn dies to an elk. Like, there's all these things. Like, Magic has just become more snowbally, and there's no one real culprit. It's a bunch of different things now.
We're actually going to hit this pretty hard in our actual topic tonight. So let's move through the feedback question, because this whole how good cards are is a big part of our real topic.
Yeah. All right. So let's do some quick MTG updates, and then we'll kind of hop into the real content. So on my end, YouTube is booming. I'm so sad that I ignored YouTube as like a platform for so long. I had my first video hit 5K views earlier this week. My Dead Guy Ale hit 5K, and my Sushi Loam video is on track to beat it. I think it's at, 2,000 or 3,000 views in 48 hours or something like that. It's going wild. Sushi Loam refers to Urborg and spreading algae, which lets you essentially destroy lands repeatedly for 1 mana. And people are just, like, eating it up.
People love land destruction all the time.
Well, when you're watching it or doing it, being on the other side of it is sometimes brutal.
Oh, yeah. That's, like, one of the most hated mechanics in the history of Magic. Like, the early days of just, like, Birds of Paradise into Stone Rain on the play. It was just like, fuck. Like, those decks that, like, Llanowar Elves, Birds of Paradise, 4 Stone Rain, 4 Pillage. And then it got to a point where WotC actually told us, like, land destruction will not cost less than 4 anymore. Like, straight up land destruction anyway. Like, there's some, like, cleansing fire.
Wildfire.
Is that what the card is called?
I know, because I played that card in Legacy last week.
Not Wildfire. The 2 mana destroy target.
Yeah, that's Cleansing Wildfire.
Oh, Cleansing Wildfire. All right. I thought we jumped straight to actual Wildfire.
No.
Like deal 4, destroy 8 lands. Which is funny because I actually am going to talk about Wildfire a little bit in our show notes later on. I have it written down.
All right.
It's weird that happened.
I own a Japanese foil Wildfire.
Oh, very nice. Why? Did you used to wish for that in the Epic Storm?
No. I have a casual deck for when I see 2 of my friends once a year. Granted, it didn't happen this year, but it's in that.
Not bad. Is the whole deck Japanese foil?
Obviously.
I appreciate the dedication to the Japanese foil lifestyle for this casual deck you have that you play against 2 friends once a year. Like, very nice. What else is going on? Oh, wait, Phil, you're still talking. Tell us about aggro taxes.
All right. So I'll mention this now because it's kind of the lead in to why I wanted to do this episode topic. But I did a crazy person thing, and I ran a Death and Taxes league where I dropped Flicker Wisp and Recruiter of the Guard from the deck and just killed people with Sarah Avengers and Luminarch Aspirants. And it was just like a crazy league, and it was super cool. And that video's up on YouTube, clickbaitingly called like Flicker Wisp is fired or something like that. And it was something that Bryant very regularly says is that if your deck isn't working, you should maybe think if there's anything you can do to rebuild it or retool it and try something new. And Death and Taxes has very consistently been putting up numbers in like the 30% range for win rates for challenges. And so I was like, well, fuck it. Let's get weird and try something new.
Very proud of you, Phil.
You mean trying something other than saying Legacy sucks on social media? I thought that was how we handle when our deck is bad in the metagame.
We're all out of ideas.
What do we do? All right, Brian, what's going on?
Well, I am very glad the Holiday Cube will be leaving Magic Online. I've burned so many play points forcing Storm the last 2 weeks, and it's been a nice little mini vacation from Legacy. I love Legacy, but, just something different is nice. But I feel like I'm missing out on all of these people playing Spreading Algae. Like, I should hop back into leagues and just start farming if people are going to be playing this ridiculous deck.
I have made so many people play Dead Guy Ale.
Yeah, like, those are also free wins. What have I been doing?
I lost to Dead Guy Al in a video. I think the one that went live yesterday, my Shark Still update. Like, I don't know if my opponent sequenced like a god or just drew their cards in the right order, but it was like every turn it was like, okay, I'm set up against Dark Confidant, I'm set up against Hymn to Tarok, I'm set up against this, and they're like, Tide Hollow Sculler, which is the thing that dodges both like Flusterstorm and Swords to Plowshares. I'm just like, oh no. And then that like collapsed my house of cards until they could like string their threats. So I was actually really impressed at how that deck performed.
Nice. Well, since everyone else is doing it, I top 8'd a vintage challenge with Underworld Outcome. We love Breach. We love Paradoxical Outcome. Why not combine them? I've actually uploaded a bunch of that content to the YouTube channel over the last few weeks, so if you're interested in a former Legacy hated card, go check those out. And my last real MTG update is I've been so busy recently, and I'm sure you guys have been too with all the content creation, that I'm losing track of things on my to-do list. Like, it's just getting longer and longer because I'm trying to make more and more content. And then I remembered the other day that I stopped reading The Boys because I needed to focus more on testing for the Pro Tour. I'm like, oh great, I have to add that back onto my list too. I still have 3 more books to read. So I just feel like I'm falling behind with everything due to creating more content for everyone.
Same.
Do I need to remind you guys that balance is important, and the content game, people will forgive you if you take a night off to read some comics or snuggle with your girlfriend. Also, things like reading the comics are totally optional. Like, if it's stressing you out to like read the comics back on your to-do list, like reevaluate, find some zen, like find a place where that's okay.
Yeah, I was proud of myself. Last night I was like, man, I have time to record a video. And I went, no. And I just like sat on the couch instead. And it was everything that I actually wanted.
I did that today, actually. I have, since I learned on Friday night that I'm going back to work tomorrow, I recorded 2 videos a day on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And it's now Tuesday. It's Tuesday the 12th, and my YouTube videos are scheduled through Tuesday the 26th. I'm like full 2 weeks out at this point. I'm just cranking them, so I have a running start. But today I totally had a window where I could have recorded a league and just watched 2 episodes of Raised by Wolves instead, and it felt good.
All right, Brian, top us off here. What's going on with you? I know you did something kind of cool via Twitter.
Yeah, so the legend Negator77, Tom Hepp, nicest and most powerful Legacy wizard that there is. He I think he's just under 55 legacy trophies this season. I think he had 53 2 days ago. And he wanted to share the wealth and throw some of his trophy money at legacy content creators. And I was one of the lucky beneficiaries. And basically, he bought a donation decklist league and said, instead of me donating a deck to you, do something cool with this money. And what I did was a brew contest where I gave people like a week and a half, 2 weeks to submit lists. And then I picked my favorite 4 lists. And then I posted those 4 lists and said, had the community vote on what I was actually going to play. And the winner, to my absolute delight, was Aminatou Yorion Miracles. That's Aminatou the Fate Shifter, the commander card. It's a planeswalker that can be your commander. I'm not going to read all the text because
there's a lot of it.
Yes, but it's an Esper Miracles deck that's also a Yorion deck that just plays 4 Aminatou the Fate Shifter in it, and that league was a lot of fun. And I realized after I posted the voting that I was going to play that deck no matter what, and I had already decided that if it didn't win, I was going to play it, and if it did win, I would play the runner-up. So I also played the runner-up, Grixis Otterbox, which is the Lutri deck I was talking about.
That is what I voted for. But not to like bring down your hyping of this Miracles deck, but people already tried that when that Planeswalker came out, and they're like, oh, this isn't good. Next Planeswalker, please. So I was like, no, I'm not going to vote for that. I want to see this one of Grixis deck like trash face. So I will watch that video.
People love the Tainted Pact style decks where it's like, okay, here I am talking through my lines, and now I have a tutor. Oh no.
So this really cool thing about the Grixis Otterbox list, a small side tangent here, it's not a Lutri deck in the main deck. It boards into being a Lutri deck. Like, isn't that crazy? I thought it was like the deck list uploaded wrong when I posted the list and realized Lutri was in the main. But the main deck plays 4 Force of Will because you can't just be that soft against combo in today's Legacy, especially if you're playing leagues. And you board into being a Lutri deck. It's like a free card to sideboard out along with 3 of your Force of Wills in the fair matchups, which I thought was really cool design space. There's a lot of modern Lurrus decks that like board in Blood Moons and they stop being a Lurrus deck post-board, but I haven't seen a deck that starts being a companion deck post-board when it wasn't in the main deck.
Well, Elves has done that before, right?
Elves...
Like, didn't they, like,
oh, yeah, you're right. There was an Elves...
some of their stuff.
There was when Lurrus was legal in Legacy, Elves was, they had Lurrus in the main deck with Natural Orders, and then if they board out Natural Orders in fair matchups, they could be a Lurrus deck as a companion. So, yes, that did happen before, you're right. But I was excited about it. Also, speaking of excited, and speaking of Negator, I recorded Deep Analysis Episode 2. The first episode was when I had Ad Nauseam Tendrils versus the Epic Storm experts talking about their decks. This episode has Jarvis Yu and Tom Hepp representing lands and depths, and we're talking about the best way to make Maral Age and the history of those 2 decks. So that was a lot of fun to record, but holy guacamole, it is so much work to produce a webcast compared to record a Magic Online League. Like, for those of you, a peek behind the scenes, a 2-hour league that I post is probably 2.5 to 3 hours of work for me. Like, I have to, set up the deck list, set up all my recording stuff. I have to make a thumbnail image. I have to upload it to YouTube. I do some minor editing to make sure like the sound levels are right, and I splice all the videos together so it's just one video. Like, probably about 40 minutes of work on top of the actual playtime. Producing, and that's for a 2-hour video, producing 1 hour of Deep Analysis takes me about 10 hours of work. Between like planning it, coming up with show notes, recording the thing, and then the editing is crazy. Because I have like card images popping up every time someone says like, oh, and then they printed Veil of Summer, I have Veil of Summer pop up on the screen. And like, I have to put all those in manually later, obviously. And then I also do my best to edit out the the ums and the like when people do that, I edit that out so we all sound smart, and it doesn't, and it's not as jarring for the listener. So a lot of work goes into that. Kudos to Force of Phil every week for doing that for us, because that's a lot of work. And the biggest thing in my Magic that's going on right now is I have a commander deck in paper again. I think I mentioned at the last episode that I recorded a commander league with Matt Sperling, Eric Virgo, and Zach Allen, and it was so much fun that I just wanted to be a commander boy in real life again. And I wanted to build a Corvold commander deck since I played Corvold in Standard last summer. Like, I played one Standard event where I played Jund Sacrificing Corvold. The card was just such a delight that I wanted to build commander around it. And then I just happened to get a commander donation deck list that was Corvold. And I was like, well, this is a sign. And I have, it's safe to say, jumped straight into the deep end. I had no commander deck 2 weeks ago. As of today, I have 85 of 96 possible foil cards for this deck. And I went straight into foil. And like, most of them are good versions of the foils too. I'm taking it a little slow on stuff, but like, I've been selling MTGO tickets and getting donation deck lists and stuff, and I promise you every cent of that has gone right into this fucking commander deck. So it was a fortunate time to have a lot of Moto tickets to get rid of, because this was not a cheap project and I am not taking it slow.
So I'm glad that you jumped straight into foils, because right after COVID started, I started playing a lot of Pioneer Lotus Breach at the time. And I was like, this deck's cool, but like, do I really want a Japanese foil Pioneer deck? Probably not. And then I played it a couple times and I was like, holy shit, I can't believe I bought this deck non-foil. So then I ended up like slowly making it Japanese foil. And now I just have like these cards in my closet that I'm never going to touch ever again, that no one's ever going to buy, because I decided that I had to own a Japanese foil. So you definitely did the right thing, Brian.
Yep. Yeah. A lot of this stuff, you buy it and it's just like, oh, I'm going to have this. I'm going to pass this on to my children. No one's going to ever buy this from me. And I'm also working on tracking down altruists who make non-foil cards into foil cards. That is a thing that exists. I've seen some really nice. My friend Nicholas Dijon, vintage expert, has a foil Tolarian Academy that's beautiful. Cyrus has a foil Reign of Filth that's beautiful. Like, there's altruists out there that just peel up the foil layer from cards and reattach it onto different cards. And I'm pretty sure I need to get my Dockside Extortionist foil, and then also my set of Allosaurus Shepherds, because the rest of my elf deck is foil. So I'm looking to foil out some high-end shit.
I guess I didn't realize that Jumpstart doesn't come foil.
It does not.
That's a tragedy.
It really is.
Is it only English?
That I don't know the answer to, but I know it's not foil.
I always disliked that about early Commander products, how they were always English, always non-foil, because that's not what Commander's about, but I don't know.
Yeah, but then, like, on the other hand, you have problems like Corvold, the card Corvold, or, like, that's from a Commander product. You can't open Corvold in a pack of Throne of Eldraine. That's from Throne of Eldraine Commander Edition, and it only exists in foil, which was a problem in Standard decks where you have 57 non-foil cards, and then your 3 Corvolds are just fucking Pringles in there, and there's nothing you can do about it except play proxies. That was the Nexus of Fate problem as well, where like you had a bunch of blue-green decks with 4 basic mountains in them. Those are my Nexus of Fate.
Wasn't there some legacy fringe playable thing that was like that? Like, was it Marchesa?
No,
Brea.
it's the Grixis one. I was at that event. It was
Cass Dissident Mage.
Yes,
that's it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That was it.
I was facing Anurag when the person next to us got their match loss.
Yeah, because Cass is such a busted card that you definitely want to cut to that one in the beginning of every game. Ugh, embarrassing stuff. One time I loaned a Legacy deck to Harry Corvisi, Actually, I loaned him many Legacy decks. He just plays and deals poker and lives in Vegas now, but he was a grinder on the Star City circuit for a couple years. And he always played Sneak and Show, and he always borrowed the deck from me. And he always complained that my Show and Tells and Sneak Attacks were judge foils, and the rest of the deck wasn't foil. But those were just the cards I had. And the one time I was like it was like the fourth time, and he was like, can't wait to borrow your cheaty Show and Tells again. And I was like, you know what, you can borrow the deck from someone else. And he was like, okay, we're all friends here. Let's settle down. I'm like, yeah, that's what I thought. And that was the end of that joke. The time that Cedric did a cartwheel on camera and hurt himself, it was my cards that he was betting on. He had a prop bet with Patrick Sullivan where Harry Corvesi resolved a turn 1 Blood Moon on the play against Jund, and they just like couldn't do anything. And then he resolved a sneak attack. He cracked with an Emrakul. The Jund player was like at 4 with no permanents under Blood Moon. And Cedric was like, if Harry loses this game, I'll do a cartwheel. And then Harry proceeded to lose the game. He just never drew another creature to sneak attack. And the Jund player, they still had red mana. They were like pyroblasting all the cantrips that would find a monster. And eventually they found Basic Forge, which cast Deathrite Shaman. And then they had mana again. And Harry lost the game, and Cedric kind of hurt himself doing a cartwheel. But those were my cards that caused that.
All right, so let's jump into the actual episode topic of the day. First, I want to take like a minute here and just kind of remind everyone what 2020 Legacy, 2021 Legacy now, I guess, looks like. People are playing powerful, proactive game plans, and they're really good. The control decks aren't sitting here dirtling anymore. They're dropping things like Mentor, Oko, Uro that threaten to take over the games quickly. And blue decks have stronger counterspell packages than ever due to the printing of Force of Negation. And you really don't have as much time to sit around as you used to. You need to be either acting or reacting or building towards a win in some way from pretty early on. You know, the hands where you're like, well, I don't do anything till turn 3 are really sus right now, to use the Among Us lingo.
Get out of here, Phil.
Brian's the imposter.
For sure. All right. So do you all want to say anything else briefly about like current Legacy? That's like obviously a gross oversimplification, but those are kind of some of the things that I want the listeners to be keeping in mind for what we're going to be talking about today.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head, Phil. We've talked about it the last 2 episodes because I said the same thing literal 2 episodes in a row about Thoughtseize sucking for that very reason. And I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but like cards that are actually seeing play now are just so strong where you counter one and then your opponent slams another haymaker the next turn and then another haymaker. Like the control decks aren't these like big, slow, like I'm going to resolve my draw spell on turn 9 decks anymore. Like that's not what today's Magic is.
Yep, definitely. I think Phil and Bryant both hit it. I got donation decks from separate players to play Loam Pox and Mono Black Pox over the last 2 weeks. Those videos are both scheduled in the queue right now. And both were bad. Oh my god. I'm sorry to the Leaving a Legacy community. I know you all enjoy making Pox memes and working on Pox. And please, if that's your deck, carry on. Power to you. But wow. Discard is not what it used to be. That's all I'm going to say on that.
To put it the way one of the Pox fans who was watching my like train wreck of a league with Red Black Pox said, when you're playing Pox, everyone suffers, including you.
Yeah, especially you.
All right, so let's talk about the origin of the episode now. This comes from a very specific moment in my life where I was scrolling Twitter and I came across something and I went, what the hell are you thinking? All right, so this deck that I saw was a blue Living Wish pile, where it essentially shoved a Living Wish package for Hate Bears into what was otherwise kind of a snow shell. And I saw this deck list. I think it was created by JTL, the primary person who has been working on the Esper Vile deck. I saw this list, and I think I even said this out loud. I was just flabbergasted. I'm like, how the fuck can you take a turn off to cast Living Wish in this metagame? I was just like flummoxed. I didn't understand. And as a result of this, I went the complete opposite direction that this person did. This is the origin of me trying that D&T League, where I dropped my things that were like card selection and slower setup cards. This is why I tried a league dropping Recruiter of the Guard and Flicker Wisp, and I just wanted to play high impact cards right now. They hit the board, you answer them, or I start pulling ahead. And this kind of led me to like spend a long time thinking about tempo, the cost of card selection, and traditional deck building knowledge of 2020, 2021.
So Phil mentioned card selection. It's not always tutors. And I'd like to point this out. There's one deck, I guess there's two if you count Doomsday, but Doomsday's recently cutting this card too, that plays Preordain, and it's Delver, because it's so good with Dreadhorde Arcanist. But more and more decks recently have been cutting Preordain because there is a cost in Legacy right now to just like sitting there doing nothing, like just casting cantrips for the sake of casting cantrips and like, well, I'll get my card quality. Like, that's not what 2020 Legacy or 2021 Legacy is about. Like, the Jax Doomsday list that I was talking about, cut Preordain for 4 personal tutor. You cast it on turn 1 and you have Doomsday turn 2. There's no like, well, I'll find Doomsday by turn 4 because my deck plays the cantrip suite. That takes up so much time. And when you see decks like Ant, for example, and I don't mean to bully on Ant all the time, it's just like that deck plays 4 Preordain instead of running more tutors. And when you have to spend time finding your cards that actually do things, you're losing to your opponent's proactive cards like Dreadhorde Arcanist and Oko and everything else.
I recorded a league today, and I don't remember exactly what my opponent was playing, but they cast a cantrip, and the immediate thing that just came out of my mouth was, oh, thank God, now they can't play on-curve Haymaker this turn.
Yeah, every time when I'm playing a more reactive deck, every time my opponent is like turn 2 Ponder, there's a giant sigh of relief. It's like, oh good, I'm not getting, the Arcanist isn't coming. And then like they brainstorm on turn 3. I'm like, oh thank God, it's not Oko. Like all of that, that definitely is a real thing.
I was watching a Rug Delver match last night with a couple of other people, and the person just immediately dazed a spell on turn 1. And Jarvis Yu probably jumped out of his chair screaming like, now you can't play Dreadhorde on turn 2, like in anger. And that's where we're at right now, where the cards you want to resolve are just so important that like dazing a random spell or letting your opponent have some like insignificant thing just like doesn't matter.
I'm at the point where I don't even daze Chalice of the Void if I'm on the draw. Like it doesn't matter. Like my hand can be like ponder, daze, and I am not dazing that Chalice of the Void because like the cost is just so high of setting yourself back a land drop in Fire Printing Legacy. So we have a whole section called What's the Cost of a Cantrip in our show notes that Brian just hammered straight through to. But right now we're talking about what's the cost of a tutor. And
I didn't read the show notes. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we know. You can't read. You can't see right now. You're blacking out. We already talked about this. It's happening. So
the sickening.
But it's okay. You're healthy. You just need more sleep. So Phil's talking about what's the cost of a tutor. And Phil, you're kind of the expert on fair tutors, Recruiter of the Guard et al. Lead us into this conversation.
Okay, so when I say fair tutors, I mean things like Green Sun Zenith, Recruiter of the Guard, Living Wish, and things of that nature. And usually when you're casting these, you are getting another fair card off of them. And these usually cost between 1 and 3 mana. And in years of Legacy past, that wasn't that big of a deal. Taking a setup turn is totally fine. But right now, if you play a tutor, it's often really hard to double spell in that turn. And casting this tutor, even if you have a little bit of mana left over, you often can't use it. And so right now, these tutors are often setting you back an entire turn cycle in order to cast them. And this can lead into some pretty spooky tempo scenarios for you, where like you cast a Recruiter of the Guard, you get your important silver bullet, then your opponent Force of Wills that, and oh no, that was 2 turns that my opponent just got for their Force of Will, and it's devastating.
Yeah, my Teferi Vacation brew that I did as a donation list, I put it into a NickFit shell, and I mostly just copied the shell and tweaked it as I wanted, but the shell I copied was a Living Wish deck. So I had the Living Wish package in my Teferi Vacation deck, and it was so bad. Like, I think that was a worse deck building decision than including the Teferi Vacation combo. And that's saying a lot because that combo is jank. Like, every time I drew Living Wish, I would have preferred a creature out of my sideboard at random. Like, it doesn't even matter which one it is. Like, let's just skip this package. Like, at the end of every video, I'm like, okay, this is what I would change about the deck. The first thing I did was just chuck those Living Wishes straight in the trash, because that is not how you can play Legacy right now.
Yeah. And like, we should probably start getting into like what you're actually getting off of these cards. So if you're just getting another fair card off of these cards, a lot of times you would feel so much better just drawing that card in the first place. If you are going and getting Knight of the Reliquary or Thalia off of your tutor, that doesn't feel great, especially when you can't deploy them in the same turn cycle. On the other hand, if that's letting you get Aethersworn Canonist or Collector Oof, or something that effectively wins you the game after it gets into play, it's an entirely different story.
So winning the game is good, you're saying?
Generally speaking.
It's certainly not bad.
Yeah, and like the flexibility of a tutor is of course part of the value. Like the idea of playing Green Sun Zenith, so you can cast it for 0 on turn 1 for Dryad Arbor, or cast it for 4 on turn 5 for Questing Beast, and anything in between. Like that's worth something. Versus like you can't just play 4 Questing Beast. Like that doesn't do the same thing for a deck build, but there is a cost to that. And part of it is that all of those things are going to cost 1 more. Like the green X on Green Sun Zenith, it adds 1 to the cost of all your creatures in exchange for you get to find the one you want when you want it. And like we were just talking about, like taking the time to cast Preordain, taking the time to daze something, setting you back in today's Legacy, that 1 extra mana is a big cost. Another big cost is these tutors are all spells. I guess Recruiter of the Guard is an exception, but they're, for the most part, tutors are non-creature spells, which opens up, like if you're a creature-heavy deck, like whatever Green Sun Zenith deck you're playing, that's a creature-centric deck, whether it's Maverick or Elves or whatever. The old Bug Zenith special. That's mostly a creature deck. And by using Green Sun Zenith, you're turning on the Force of Negation, the Spell Pierce, the Flusterstorm, the things that can't hit creatures normally. And this is something that I call my soft answer bottleneck theory, which is like a card with only 1 target in a matchup will be more potent and hit the important spell more often than in matchups with many targets. So, like, if you think about Elves, and you're playing Elves and your opponent has Force of Negation in their hand, that's a dead card until you want to resolve Natural Order. And then it's a very good card. This is where the Wildfire comes up, Phil, or Bryant, we're back to Wildfire. Yes. There's this individual at one of my local game stores a couple years ago. He's mostly retreated to the shadows. He was generally cantankerous, an absolute rager, bad manners at the table. We don't miss him. But he built a modern Wildfire deck where it had all the artifact mana, ramps into a quick Wildfire, destroys all your lands, you still have artifact mana, the classic cube deck. But he built it in modern. And the only creature in his deck was Wormcoil Engine. He played 3 or 4 of those, and he would lose his shit every time that card got Path to Exiled. And you could not explain to him that the opponent always has the Path to Exile because there's no other target. Like, you're not challenging the removal up the curve, and then your big fatty wins at the end. They have 4 paths in their deck. You have 3 or 4 Wormcoil Engines, and it's not going anywhere except at Wormcoil Engine. And that's what I'm talking about here. Like, opening up your opponent's force negations, their spell pierces against your tutor, which is presumably one of your payoffs. If you've chosen to play a tutor, it's probably important. You're turning on the half of their deck that your main plan has turned off. So that's a pretty big cost as well.
So, as the person here that plays tutors the most often, and I think that's pretty fair to say, Phil, I play 8.
Oh, yeah,
Come on,
for
come
sure.
on. And I get asked this a lot, and it's like, you play Burning Wish, why don't you play a big package? I recorded a video last week with Alex McKinley, and we had 5 Burning Wish targets, with one of them being Thoughtseize that we sometimes board in. And people say, like, oh, why don't you run like an Answer to Deafening Silence? Why don't you run like a Bifrost to answer, Chalice to the Void or whatever? Imagine playing Burning Wish, taking a turn to cast Burning Wish to then get a Bifrost, and then you Bifrost your opponent's Chalice of the Void and you pass the turn. And now on your turn 4, you're going to try to win the game, and they've done nothing else in all this time. Like, what Christmas land are you living in? Where you're going to take 2 turns off just to answer a Chalice. Like, that's not how Magic works. Like, I play Pulverize sometimes. Like, recently I haven't been playing it because the Chalice decks are kind of gone. But, like, at least with Pulverize, when you cast it, you're winning the same turn. And so, if you're going to play cards like that, they have to be really efficient. So, when you look at cards like Massacre, not that I recommend playing it because it's just not worthwhile, but Massacre, Reverent Silence, Bifrost, they all allow you to capitalize very quickly. Playing clunky cards that you're getting with these tutors is sort of what Phil was saying, like, you're going to eat a force, or they're just going to replay something else because you took so long.
Yeah, that parlays directly into our unfair tutors, which is the next thing we're going to talk about. And I think that Burning Wish in general is going to be considered an unfair tutor, the decks that play it. I have seen some random, like, Miracles lists that are, like, Jeskai with Burning Wish, and like, I saw like a Shark Typhoon deck that has 1 replenish in the sideboard to Burning Wish for, and like, you can be cute like that, but those are the fair tutors, which we have just discussed are mostly not worth doing, compared to just drawing a card that's impactful right away. But the unfair tutors...
To pause you real second, Brian, you're an OG. Do you remember Burning Tog in Legacy?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Sorry.
Yeah, that was back when you could do stuff like that. Forget about the burning. You could Tog back then.
Play my Nightscape Familiar on turn 2. Turn 3 Burning Wish. I'll get Persecute. Oh, man.
I'll cast Persecute, naming red, against my mono blue opponent. They say it resolves. Then on resolution, I say blue. They changed the rules about that too, by the way.
Yeah.
That was the thing you used to be able to do. But trips down memory lane aside, the unfair tutors, the Burning Wish, Cunning Wish, Infernal Tutor, and Doomsday is it may not be on the list of tutors that jumps into your brain, but you're tutoring for 5 cards and putting them in your deck instead of your hand. So Doomsday is a pretty powerful tutor. Those tend to win the game right away or on the next turn. And the tempo loss doesn't matter as much because the game is over. That's exactly what Bryant just said about wishing for Bifrost versus wishing for Pulverize. Like, this is a 0 mana spell. I'm casting it now. It's clearing the way, and you're dead. I'm not worried about spending 2 mana, then sacking 2 lands, and ending up down a card all in one turn, because there's not going to be another turn. I don't have to recoup that card loss somewhere else. So that's where those unfair tutors... that's why combo decks get away with that when fair decks generally don't. And then there's the card negative tutors, which Brian talked about a little bit with adding Personal Tutor to Doomsday. The card negative tutors are Enlightened Tutor, Personal Tutor, Mystical, Vampiric. Those other tutors replace themselves, like the card goes directly to your hand. These put the card on top of your deck. So you are signing up for card disadvantage. You spent a card that did not create a card. It created an opportunity to do something powerful. And you need to be able to pay off on that. So Brian's talking about cutting Preordain from Doomsday for 4 Personal Tutor. that's betting that I'm going to win this game on turn 2 or turn 3. The turn after I personal tutor, I'm going to win because I've just lost a card, and I need to end the game before that card matters. And in Vintage, there's I was in a lot of conversations about how to build Paradoxical Outcome a couple years ago. This is before Bolas' Citadel was printed, because now you obviously just play Tinker and get Bolas' Citadel in your PO deck. But there was a time when you could build it as more of a control deck with a combo kill, or a combo deck with some controlling elements. And I was a big fan of, I only played Demonic Tutor, and in my PO deck to actually search. In general, I was just drawing cards and doing control deck things. And then Stephen Menendian, he was doing things like Vampiric Tutor and Mystical Tutor for Tinker. And Tinker is the type of card that you can spew resources into getting it to resolve. So you play your Vampiric Tutor, you're down a card. You cast your Tinker, sack an artifact, you're down another card. But that's the kind of power level where you can spend 3 cards because you're going to win the game if it resolves. Versus, like, if you don't have a Tinker win, then you don't want to play Vampiric Tutor because it's just card disadvantage in your control deck. So that's another important thing to think about. The most controversial one is Enlightened Tutor, because you can see how a Mystical or Vampiric Tutor would win the game on the spot. They're both banned in Legacy for a reason, but Enlightened Tutor is still around. And I've been playing Shark still a lot. That's a deck that plays Shark Typhoon, it plays Standstill, it plays Courts of Cunning and Grace. A lot of artifacts and enchantments in those lists. I bored into Deafening Silence and Nullrod. You're welcome, Bryant. Those are for you. And every single time in the comments on those videos, someone's like, what about adding Enlightened Tutor? You play so many things, you could find your bullets. And it's like, I would rather just draw a card. These are not decks that can afford to do that. Basically, the only time you can afford to do that is if you're like wishing for moat against goblins or elves or something. Like, it has to be something moat level. It has to be something they can't reasonably answer, and it has to win the game on the spot. Like, you're not going to be happy about wishing for Court of Grace and becoming the Monarch and then, like, slowly recouping those cards. Like, you want the game to end. Enlightened Tutor for Helm of Obedience when you already have Rest in Peace in play. That's a worthwhile play. But in general, you can't just be adding Enlightened Tutors to your blue-white control decks.
So this is a brainstorming idea that I honestly thought of last week, but it's sort of pertinent to this episode. It originally came to my mind because I was like, what would the mana cost on Golden Wish have to be for that card to be playable? But not just Golden Wish, like the non-Burning Wish wishes, like Cunning Wish sees fringe play. But what would the actual cost on those cards need to be in order for them to be competitive again?
What is Golden Wish?
3 white, get an artifact or enchantment from out of the game.
It seems crazy to me, but also totally in line with the way cards were designed in the earlier days of Magic, that wishing for an artifact or enchantment costs 5, but a sorcery costs 2. Like, what the fuck, Wizards? And that's not even the old days. That's like, I guess that's not really the midpoint of Magic anymore. It's slightly
it's
past
middle school.
Yeah, it's firmly middle school. It's not alpha beta. Like, it was in like reasonably close to the modern card frame that those cards were printed, and they were still like, sorceries are fine, but artifacts and enchantments, watch out for those.
Well, going back to your point about like land destruction, I felt like Red lost part of its identity when they were just like, people decided blowing up their lands wasn't fun anymore. Like, who cares? I don't like my spells getting countered either. You're not going to quit running counter spells. Like,
well, they did the same thing to counter spells that they did to Stone Rains. They made them cost 3. Like, Stone Rains cost 4 now. Counter spells cost 3 now. Isn't cancel in every single set? Like, almost every set has the card literal cancel in it, plus some variant at rare. Like, counter spells just cost 3 now, and they did the same thing that they did to Red. I don't like that Dark Ritual costs 1.
Yeah, well, you get to draw 3.
Yeah, I know.
for
It
yours.
gets countered by my Chalice of the Void when I put them in the same deck. It's fucking awful.
But yeah, so like I was thinking about that, and I was like, I just can't imagine what the mana cost on Golden Wish would have to be. If it was white, would it be playable? I don't think so. And
Dude, white cards are hard as fuck to cast.
Yeah,
But-
that's harder than white 2 in a lot of situations.
I don't know. That was just something I thought of.
So just kind of like capping off this section here, I want you to keep in mind that like when we're talking about these tutors, a lot of times we're talking about a 1 or 2 mana investment, and we're all like, ah. So if that tells you a little bit about where Legacy is at right now in terms of like board impact and acting, I don't know. I lost where that sentence was going, but impacting the board quickly matters. TLDR.
Yes, definitely true. Which brings us into our next section, which Bryant already started, which was what is the cost of a cantrip? And this is partially inspired by Rich Calley's recent article on Channel Fireball, where it's called Updating Heuristics. And he challenges some classic heuristics of legacy play. Like one of them is the best brainstorm is the one you don't cast, or like holding on to your brainstorms as long as possible. And his counter heuristic is I'd hate to lose with brainstorm in my hand. And that's kind of, I mean, I see what he's coming from. On the corollary to that is I love winning with brainstorm in my hand. Like if you don't need it, save it. But basically what he was trying to get at is he was challenging the idea that you always want to main phase your brainstorm, you always want to fetch land. He basically was like, if your hand has Dreadhorde Arcanist but not the second land, or you have the second land but not the Dreadhorde Arcanist, maybe you want to cast that end step brainstorm at the end of your opponent's first turn to maximize your chance of doing something powerful on turn 2. Like, forget the shuffle. Dreadhorde Arcanist is going to be more powerful than shuffling those dead cards away. And that's definitely in line with what we've been saying.
Also, there's no written rule book about the order in which you should cast your cantrips. I've done tutoring sessions with people where they're like, no, you preordain, then you ponder, then you brainstorm. That's not how Magic works. Like, there are no, like, definite rules, and it's really context dependent, so please don't fall into those traps.
Yeah, I did an entire, 15-minute video on what the different cantrips do compared to each other, and why you might want to cast one but not the other. Like we see in Legacy, Brainstorm is a 4 of, and Preordain is between like 0 and 2 most of the time. But in a Pauper deck that doesn't have the fetch lands, you see 4 Preordain and 1 or 2 Brainstorm in the blue decks. So it's just like what's available in the format to make the cantrips good, and that's always important to know. In general, I think that the Brainstorm heuristics, I still think that if somebody were to come to me and they're like, hey, I just started playing Legacy, what do I need to know? I would lean towards Brainstorm. The best Brainstorm is the one you don't cast, more than I'd hate to lose with Brainstorm in my hand. Though, I would definitely hate to lose with Brainstorm in my hand, don't get me wrong. But I also love winning with Brainstorm in hand. So it's complicated. His other heuristic...
Here, before we go to that, can I just say something? Because I think this is a great point. What we're doing right now is talking about an established heuristic. And heuristics are general rules of thumb. And learning the heuristic is how you start to get better. And learning when that heuristic doesn't apply and when you should break it and deviate from it is kind of the point of mastery.
I've never, going back to I'd hate to lose with Brainstorm in my hand, I don't think I've ever died and gone like, oh, if only I had the Gohon Ace to cast that Brainstorm. Like, that's never something that's crossed my mind. I'm like, oh, maybe I should have been more aggressive on this turn, or maybe I should have done this. But I question, like, a series of plays. It's just never like, oh, cast Brainstorm at the wrong time.
Yeah, I mean, I think we might be getting lost in the exact language of this proposed heuristic. We know that Rich is smart. He knows what he's talking about. And I think it is bold and smart to challenge those sort of established rules. And, like, for the longest time, you board out Force of Will in fair matchups. I've talked about this before on this cast, and like there was a long period of time in Legacy where like if I played against Death and Taxes, I just cut all of my Force of Wills. They were the first thing to go. Don't even think about it. They're gone. But
get Cataclysm, fool.
Right. And then Cataclysm and Gideon started happening to the people who were boarding out their all their Force of Wills. I think I've told this story before. Sorry, listeners, but I played against a friend. I tried Death and Taxes for 2 events, and I played against a friend on Rug Delver in one of those events. And in our game 3, he Force of Willed 3 of my spells. And I was like, you left those in? And he was like, obviously, I would have died if those spells resolved. And that just like, he went against the common knowledge, the heuristic, and he won because of it. And now, in modern days, these powerful cards, the Dreadhorde Arcanist, the Oko, those things, you gotta force them. You don't get to cut down to 0 Force of Will in fair matchups anymore. And, like, challenging the heuristics do change over time, printings change, and the idea that, like, Bryant, as a combo player, I'm sure you know all about the, like, end-step brainstorm, because I'm just missing one high likelihood to hit thing. Like, I see 3 cards, I have 3 looks at a 20 outer or whatever, and if I hit, I win, but if I go to my turn, then it becomes a 7 outer or whatever. Like, I don't know, those are all, I made up all those numbers, but you know what I'm talking about. Combo's been doing this all along, but the idea that a fair deck maybe should be pushing its opportunity to cast a powerful card earlier rather than maximize a brainstorm in the traditional sense is a bold one to say out loud.
So I know that this session isn't about heuristics and it's about the cost of a cantrip, but some players like general rules. Like someone today, I recently made an Epic Storm subreddit. They were like, when do I cast Echo of Aeons? Can't talk tonight. But when do I cast Echo of Aeons? And I was like, there's no real answer. Like, it's all context dependent. And they just asked, they're like, I just want a heuristic. But that's not what I do. Like, I'm not going to tell you, well, you only cast it when you're about to die, because that's not true. And it's just like strange that some people live in these worlds to me where they like play Magic based on these things that other people have told them. One of the Underworld outcome videos that I recorded, I was like, this Time Lock card does literally nothing in my deck. I don't play creatures. It's a glorified explorer. I'm cutting it. And I talk about why in more in detail. But I was sort of expecting somebody to be like, you know, you're an idiot. Like, I can't believe you're cutting Time Lock. And the reaction was just like, yeah, Time Lock makes no sense in Vintage anymore. Which is just like not what I was expecting at all.
Yeah, like that's the difference between like a strong or a medium player. Like figuring, like knowing that the heuristics aren't rules and figuring out how to break them or when to step out of the heuristic is a huge level up for players. Like learning that there are heuristics and what they are is a level up from like the kitchen table to FNM. But then when you go from FNM to like a Star City top 8, that person broke some rules. That person was not reading a sideboard guide. The sideboard guide might be sort of it's not really a heuristic in the traditional sense, but it's sort of like a written guide of, like when I look at a sideboard guide, I'm not like, oh, okay, Bryant cuts the ponders for this in this matchup. And that's right. I'm thinking he does this, and that tells me what he thinks about the matchup, in that there's not going to be time to ponder in this matchup, which tells me what he thinks is important, so now I can play the way he would play. Like, that's what I get out of a sideboard guide. If you're, like, subscribing to people's Patreons and buying sideboard guides and just copying them straight up, like, play, draw, doesn't matter, like, just doing exactly what they said, you're not getting the full value out of your purchase. And, I do think sideboard guides are valuable. I do appreciate them a lot for a new deck because it helped me get inside the head of the deck's designer, but I'm not following that perfectly, and neither should you if you're looking to level up.
I don't even follow my own sideboard guides a good portion of the time because, like, you learn things in match, and it's like, oh, they're playing this fringe option. That means my usual boarding plan isn't really good because if I board like I normally do, I don't have outs to this stupid enchantment. I need to bring in Council's Judgment, which otherwise doesn't really have good targets.
Yeah, In recording Deep Analysis this week, I talked to Jarvis, like probably 5 years ago at this point. He tried to help me learn to play Red Green Lands. This was the season that Jarvis got 1st, 5th, 9th, and 10th in 4 consecutive Legacy Grand Prix with lands, which is like pretty insane. He made Gold Pro that year, basically as a Legacy Pro. So it's a pretty huge accomplishment. And he did put some time. He was answering my questions, but I was looking for those easy heuristics of like someone who has never played this deck before. I'm coming from Elves. I'm coming from Delver. This is totally different. How do you like sideboard here? And he'd be like, well, on the play, I do this. On the draw, I do this. But if you see this, you have to do this. If you see this, but they play it like this, you have to do it this way. And I'm just like, nope, I don't. I'm not going to put in the work to learn this deck. And it is. And during that period of time, like Jarvis, Dave Long, Kevin King, there were just a number of people who were in the top 8 of every Star City event and every Grand Prix because they were masters with lands. And it was a hard deck. And you couldn't heuristic your way into that deck. Like you can heuristic with Delver, you can heuristic with Miracles, but there are no lands heuristics. It's all understanding context fluidly. And it gets rewarded if you're willing to put in the work, but most people aren't, myself included. So Rich's other thing, this is contrary to the always main phase your brainstorm. It was executing a game plan proactively is the most effective strategy in many cases. And this is the number one thing, the number one feedback I give in my donation leagues, because I get some wild brews. Sometimes people just have like, they just want to see me play a good deck, or they send me the deck that's mostly tuned, and that's cool. But sometimes they send a wild brew. And it is really hard to assemble contraptions in Modern and Legacy and Vintage versus just executing a good game plan. I recorded a video. It's probably going to come out the same day as this cast does. A local guy, Franklin, he's a brewer. He's a bro. And he sent me eggs, Modern Eggs. Remember that deck? It won a Pro Tour, then they banned it. But he sent me an updated eggs list. It killed with Bitter Ordeal. It was a Gravestorm deck. It was a well-conceived deck. All the pieces made sense. Everything worked toward the same goal. And the league did not go well because if you stumble a little bit, you lose. You don't impact the board until you're comboing. You're going to lose. You're susceptible to basically everything. Like a deck like Eggs, Graveyard Hate, Artifact Hate, Counter Spells, Discard Spells, it all collapses your plan. You lose to anyone who's doing anything powerful and proactive. And also it was just like half a turn to a turn slower than the format. Even with no disruption, a prowess deck could just kill you before you combo. And you can work so hard to build this cool shell, and it's just not as good as curving like, Ponder, Dreadhorde Arcanist, Oko, or whatever. Or Mother of Runes, Thalia, Sanctum Prelate. Like whatever your curve is, it's going to be better than the person who's joking around over there.
Especially if your list is untuned. I played a red-black Pox league recently, and it was really a 3-color deck because there were 4 Wastelands and 4 Mishra's Factories in there, and it was also trying to cast Kroxa. And there were so many times where I just stumbled over myself because I didn't have the correct mana combination for turn 2 or turn 3, and I fell behind on tempo and could never, ever recover. Like, being proactive, staying on curve, making plays that matter, it's so important right now.
So I was talking to someone this week, and they were saying, like, maybe I'll go back to playing a different deck every week. That way I get Brewer's Advantage. They tend to play a lot of piles. And I said, you also, like, you do get the Brewer's Advantage, but you also have a negative advantage, a loss, when you play unrefined decks. Because your opponent might not know exactly what you're doing, but if they have a pulse, they'll probably be able to figure out what ballpark you're in, and then from there they can like start to figure stuff out, and then oh, they had Cavern, but they named Giant. Like, what giants are they playing? They played an island. What creature type is Uro? Like, that sort of thing. Like, they'll be able to eventually piece out the puzzle what you're eventually trying to do. But your decks, when you're just like, I'm going to play this random stuff, they're often not as good because you don't have like months and years and whatever refining it, making all these decisions perfect as well. And I think that sometimes people just overrate Brewer's Advantage, which kind of falls into these donation decks that we're talking about.
I had a conversation like that with Steve Rubin, 3-time Platinum Pro Steve Rubin. We were leaving Grand Prix Louisville in probably 2016, 15. I don't know. It was a standard GP. I think Jody Keith won it. But Steve Rubin played mono white in that Grand Prix, which was not a deck in the standard metagame at all. He basically made it up the morning before we left for the Grand Prix. He was still tuning it in the car when we got there. And he put up a mediocre result. I think he day two'd but didn't cash. And then in the car on the way home, he was just sort of like, oh, I don't know, that was weird. I feel like my deck was pretty well positioned and nobody knew what I was doing. And I was like, well, you didn't know what you were doing either. Like, if you put in the work, like if you put in 2 weeks of like Moto Leagues, really got your sideboard figured out, got everything tuned, you know exactly what you need to do in your matchups, then you have Brewer's Advantage. Like, if you show up and your opponent's reacting to you on the fly, but you're reacting to them on the fly too, you both have disadvantage against the Brew, but they have a better tuned deck. And though that conversation was never spoke of again, Steve Rubin became a Platinum Pro the next year by playing better decks and tuning them well. So I'm going to take credit for that. But but he did go from like memeing with his own piles to like really putting in the work. He built the Abzan deck that Ari Lax won the Pro Tour with. He built the green-white tokens deck that he won his Pro Tour with. And he just got serious about his brews and put in the work. And he was rewarded for it once he started putting in the work. But playing a random shit deck is not Brewer's Advantage. That's just playing a random shit deck.
Yeah, if you're trying to get the Brewer's Advantage, your advantage has to be so good that you're saying, I know more than the hive mind that is working on Rug Delver knows, and this is where I want to be. Like, you have to have some real confidence if you want to be playing a brew, a fringe strategy. You need to know your stuff, because there's so many people out there working on Rug Delver or Snow or anything of that nature.
So, believe it or not, the title of this section is called The Cost of a Cantrip, so we should probably head back to those. So, we talked about the cost of playing tutors and taking time off to cast things like Golden Wish, obviously, premium legacy spell. But I touched on it earlier with the time that it takes to cast a cantrip like Preordain, and it not actually being impactful, and it's just another card in the chain when you're casting another Ponder or Brainstorm or whatever. So, Brian, you're out of the three of us, you're the most likely to cast additional cantrips. Why don't you chime in?
Yeah, so it's really hard, like we've been talking about. Like, I don't want to say any like heuristics because we're currently crapping on the idea of heuristics. But like, I want to get every drop out of every cantrip most of the time. Like, people who watch my stuff, they hear me say it all the time. Like, this hand has Island Ponder. That's the nut draw I'm going to keep. Like, doesn't matter what deck I'm playing. Doesn't matter what the other 5 cards in the hands are. If it has basic Island Ponder, I'm keeping that hand almost all the time. But then I usually don't cast that Ponder, which is like the part that freaks people out. I'm usually just like, Island to go. And because the draw step for my turn, if I just spike the land, then I get to save my Ponder for later. And if I don't hit the land, I'm a card deeper looking for it. So like, and sometimes I just like miss my land drop. I look at 5 cards, like draw for turn, Ponder, shuffle, draw for Ponder. Those 5 cards aren't the land, and then I lose. But I think enough times I've been paid off for that I keep doing it. And I think that a lot of people would like panic and ponder right away. And just like the figuring out how to cantrip in a way, like especially tying it back to Rich's like end step brainstorm might be fine theory, is like maybe I should ponder turn 1 more often. I don't know. Like that's it's just you have to get into those situations and feel the reps and like really understand like how these cards work before you like are really able to make them dance.
I played a Sneak and Show League today. Well, I guess you can call it Sneak and Show, but it had Hull Breachers and Days Undoings in there as well. And there were a couple of games where like I lost, or a few turns later I'm like, maybe 4 turns ago I should have cast that cantrip instead, or maybe I should have held this. I didn't think about this weird thing happening that was going to make me want to have a cantrip in hand. Like, cantrips are complicated. Having access to them is one of the best ways to increase your consistency in Legacy. And the Everyday Eternal podcast from a couple weeks ago, where they had, is Pemin is his handle?
Mark Pope.
Yeah. He was on the show, and I forget who was saying it. It might have been him, or it might have been Callum. But they were saying one of the best things you can do to increase your consistency in Legacy is have access to cantrips and have access to Force of Will, because like they let you be more consistent. So I don't want people to think like we're super down on cantrips and you should be cutting them from your Legacy decks, because like they are awesome and they have huge amounts of value. But like I hope we're showing that there is way more thought to these than like meets the surface when you first take a quick look at them, even if you've been playing Legacy for years.
So up until 2019 and 2020, when you used to read MTG The Source, or the olden days, the subreddit before then, you'd see people going like, it doesn't matter, brainstorm, ponder, preordain, everything's the same every game. And like every blue deck played those, but then like Miracles added Predict, and that really pushed it over the top for a little while. And then AK came, and it got to a point where Miracles was mostly air. They played like 20 cantrips, and decks started going super low to the ground to beat Miracles because the deck was all air. And at some point you do hit diminishing returns, but we're in a different era now where I think going down on cantrips is actually the first time in a very long time it's correct. I'm not trying to say ponder and brainstorm suck. I'm trying to say that maybe preordain isn't the card you want to be playing, and maybe you don't want to be playing predict, because having air in your deck right now comes at a cost.
Yeah, like when I play my Shark Still, my blue-white decks, my Court Still, like my whatever it is, like the decks that people tend to associate me with, the games I lose are because my answers don't line up with their questions, or because I've answered their questions but can't ask one of my own quick enough. And like the idea of choosing to like try to manipulate, ponder, brainstorm, Swords to Plowshares, Force of Will, Counterspell, Dovin's Veto into a point where like the board is clear and you know it'll stay clear, and you're going to resolve your 4-mana Court of Grace, it's a lot to ask. Like, I know that I'm choosing to play on hard mode. It would be so much easier to just, like, Oko Uro people. And, like, I'm choosing to do that for my own personal reasons. And if there was a Grand Prix tomorrow, I would just play Rug Delver, like, honestly. So keep that in mind when you see people trying to do other things. Like there is a real cost to sticking with your deck or trying to commit to the cantrip life when like the power of a cantrip is that it doesn't cost a card. Like that's what cantrip means. A cantrip is a spell in Dungeons and Dragons that doesn't use a spell slot. Like that's where that word comes from. And like Dreadhorde Arcanist adds to your spell slots. Like if that thing sticks around, it's a cantrip as well as a monster, and the second turn it's around, it's actual card advantage beyond the cantrip. Uro is a cantrip. Oko generates card advantage. Like it's not like selecting cards to find like the perfect surgical thing is the way Legacy is played anymore. It's who resolves their hammer and sticks it the hardest, and Preordain might not be part of that equation.
Love Haymaker Magic.
Yeah, that's a
but sorry, Phil. One quick thing, Brian. I love when you just ran off a bunch of like silly control deck names. In the future, when you do this, can you start like putting in like one or two fake ones, like an alligator's tumble, or like just something like, and see if anyone catches on. Like it would just make me happy.
And I can try. I actually got to sneak in on Tom Hepp on Negator when we were recording Deep Analysis. I was like, so what are the bad matchups for depths? And he's like, the cards I'm worried about are Caracas, Wasteland, and Swords to Plowshares. So decks like Death and Taxes and Maverick that play all three of them are a problem. And I was like, you didn't mention Shark Still. My deck plays all three of those. So I am looking for opportunities to inject Shark Still into all situations. But now I'm going to have to find excuses to say like, I don't know, blue dinos or whatever.
God, why did you mention that? So I got a donation for a blue-green Dino Stompy deck featuring Oko and Brazen Borrower, and I love playing Shifting Ceratops. It's a card that is just fun to play, but I need to sit down and give that deck list some love, because I feel like right now it's in that like close but no cigar range where I'm going to trip over myself just a little bit too much and die. So I'm hoping to get that to a slightly better performance state before I record with it.
God, I love Shifting Ceratops.
I played in Pioneer.
All right. So something I wanted to say a minute ago, going off of like Brian's like hammer point. There used to be a time when the hammers that Legacy had to offer weren't that good. Like, when a hammer hit play, it was Tarmogoyf, and you were getting clocked for 4 a turn, and that was scary, but you had time to spin the wheels for 1 or 2 turns without it being like, this is game over. And in a deck like Death and Taxes, you know, you might face something like Mirran Crusader, which similarly was also like 4 damage a turn. Now you're facing down a Dreadhorde Arcanist, which is just like cantripping, and it just buries you in cards so quickly. And while the life totals might be changing a little bit slower, the realistic impact that it has on the game is so much higher.
Yeah, it's the Bane Drifters. I feel like a broken record. I talk about Bane Drifters so much, and if you haven't listened to any of my content for the last 2 months where I mention them every week on every video, like Baneslayer Angel is like the Tarmogoyf for the Mirran Crusader that Phil was just talking about. Like, if your opponent resolves Baneslayer Angel with you at 20, you don't have the answer right away. It gets in 3 times before you draw the Doomblade. You're at 5. You kill it. You're at 5. You got room to breathe. Muldrifter, on the other hand, like, it resolves. Your opponent draws 2 cards, but it's just a 2/2. You got a lot of time to deal with that thing if you're even going to deal with it at all. The damage was the cards it drew more than the 2/2 body. But Oko and Dreadhorde Arcanist and Uro, they're Bane Drifters. They do both. Like, your life total is under meaningful pressure while your opponent is pulling ahead on card advantage. And that's the fire printing. That's what people are complaining about. Like, Wizards of the Coast printing for kind of to the lowest common denominator. I feel a little disingenuous saying it that way, but it's like they focus grouped people who played Magic for the first time and were like, what do you think we could do better? Rather than like, how can we make the game better to like invested players, even invested casual players, like someone who has like 15 years of Commander experience under their belt. Like, I would trust that person. Like, I don't think they're excited. Like, I follow like Pleasant Kenobi and Tolarian Community College and Mana Curves and like all of these mostly Commander-centric content creators, and they're not all super excited about these bananas Commander cards either. So why are we getting them in Legacy too? And Standard? Like, I frequently forget that Oko was just released into Standard. That's not even a Modern Horizons card, like, or a Commander card. That was just you can buy that in packs on the shelf. So like I hope that Wizards realize this is not great for Magic. And the original Bane Drifters are Planeswalkers. Like, this started in Lorwyn. And I know that some big names, like including John Finkel, just thinks that Planeswalkers are just inherently bad for Magic and should never have existed as a card type. So I don't know where we can go with that, because Magic's brand is inherently linked to the Planeswalker adventures at this point. Like, we're getting a Netflix show. Like, all of this stuff is planned. We just had our Avengers Endgame in War of the Spark, with all the Planeswalkers showing up together. I don't think Planeswalkers are going anywhere, but I really hope that just random cards stop also being Planeswalkers.
I would like 1 mana answers to Planeswalkers. Okay, thanks, bye.
Well, they've started that, but they're conditional. Bloodchief's Thirst, eliminates close. Like, they're starting to do it, but the problem is that these cards needed to exist a couple years ago. And, that's part of the reason why Wrenn and 6 was such a big issue. Like, Bloodchief's Thirst would have been really good to have during that era. Wrenn and 6 probably would still get banned, who knows. But it would have been something to help her eliminate, like, just more options. Like, right now, Planeswalkers are held a little too high on the pedestal.
Yeah, there's a common in Kaldheim coming out soon that was previewed. It's Black 2, exile target creature or Planeswalker instant. That was a rare in Ixalan, like Vraska's Contempt. Now it's just a common in this new set. So they're clearly, like, moving in the direction of, we need to answer these permanents, and it shouldn't be special. Like, it shouldn't be like the Elder Spell. It should just be like Doomblade, but also Planeswalkers.
Yeah, but the Elder Spell's fucking sweet.
The Elder Spell is so
Elder
sweet.
Spell is sick.
I think I've only actually slurped a Planeswalker onto my Planeswalker like twice, but when that happens, my god, is it nice.
So, I have a question that I thought of during Brian's control rant, and that is, a couple of years ago, virtual card advantage was talked about a lot. That isn't really a thing anymore. Like, they're like, yeah, well, my counterbalance is going to probably create like 3 or 4 cards, and, like, this other card is worth like this many cards. I feel like that's gone for the most part, other than Oko, which, like, Oko will create physical cards. Not virtual cards, but like...
Yeah, that's not virtual.
Yeah,
that's
it's like not quite the
space.
same thing. Yeah, so like virtual card advantage doesn't seem to exist anymore. Or maybe I'm wrong and I'm just like not thinking of other cards that do it, but it seems like Chalice of the Void's gone. That's a virtual card advantage card because it shuts off X number of cards in your opponent's deck. Storm decks are inherently creating virtual card advantage by not turning on Swords to Plowshares, but like Swords... the value of that card's gone down. We're seeing more effects like Abrupt Decay and Oko. So like the virtual card advantage, even from playing no creatures, is starting to diminish. So it's just something that I've thought of for a little while, and it seems appropriate here.
Yeah.
That used to be one of those things that I would talk about in almost every single video that I recorded. Back when I was like playing almost exclusively Red Prison and Death and Taxes. Every league, it was virtual card advantage, card advantage, because Mother of Runes is on, Mother of Runes is active, Chalice is in play, Moon is in play. I have so much virtual card advantage. And I cannot think of the last time that I used that phrase in a video.
Yeah, so I recorded with that Aggro Mentor deck we mentioned, the Arcanist Mentor deck that plays 3 Counterbalance, and Counterbalance was big pile of garbage because your deck, other than its cantrips, can't manipulate the top of the deck. I also had 3 Counterbalance in the Aminatu Yorion Miracles deck, and Counterbalance was actually like pretty okay there because one of Aminatu's abilities is draw a card, put a card from your hand on top. So you actually do have sort of a repeatable top of the deck manipulation, but it still didn't feel good. I boarded it out a lot. It's like game 1 Counterbalance. I feel pretty good if it counters 2 or 3 spells, but then like they're gonna have Red Blast, they're gonna have Abrupt Decay. They have like Cavern of Souls. Like this card's just getting cut, and you need your card advantage to not be virtual. You need it to be tangible these days.
For both Chalice and Counterbalance, we saw the same thing happen where, due to 2019 and 2020 power creep, decks got real mana curves. They just weren't one casting cost spells anymore. So I feel like that's an unspoken thing about those cards where like people are like, yeah, I want to play 3 mana cards. And like that didn't happen a couple of years ago. People are like, I guess I'll play Council's Judgment. Maybe instead I'll play 2 engineered explosives. Like that's just like no one wanted to play, Monastery Mentor in the main other than Brian and Wilson, but
it was just me. And the listeners obviously can't see it, but the number of plaques and trophies behind me indicate that it was a good idea. But like Phil recorded a deck, a Niv Mizzet list this week, and he showed me the list before I recorded, and I called it 3-drop tribal in the chat, and it basically it was just like Uro, Oko, Teferi, just all of these 3-drops, and I call it 3-drop tribal not to make fun of it, because starting at War of the Spark, 3-drop tribal was like kind of the new legacy. We hadn't quite figured out Dreadhorde Arcanist yet. Justin Frank showed up at SCGCon that year and did well in both Legacy and Vintage. I think he top-8'd both with Dreadhorde Arcanist before anyone else was really playing it. But at that event, I was playing Teferi, Narset, Monastery Mentor. Like, I was on 3-drop tribal. And I also top 16 both those events. And it felt really good. Just who resolves the most 3-drops is going to win the game in Legacy. Which, in Legacy, that should be true. Like, if you resolve 2 3-drops, you probably should win a Legacy game, given the card pool. But the fact that we are, like, skewing up into, like, Felidar Retreat, and Uro is a 4-mana spell on the half that really counts. So that's... It's a more expensive format, and there's bangers the whole way up the curve.
How much of that do you think is that blue decks are more insulated from things going wrong in the early game due to having more copies of Force of Will? Because previously...
that definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, I've said various versions of this before, but, like, if Force of Negation didn't exist, it would be easier to challenge the tap-out nature of blue decks. If Dreadhorde Arcanist didn't exist to recoup the card advantage, a deck like Rugdell probably couldn't afford to play 6 or 7 forces. Like, you can't eat too many Hymn to Tarax before you're just out of gas, unless you've resolved some repeatable Bane Drifter type action in Dreadhorde Arcanist or Oko or Sylvan Library. Like, so the return of Sylvan Library, that card's been legal as long as Legacy has existed. And it's like seeing some play as like a 1 or 2 of in like Maverick or whatever. But the fact that control decks are playing up to 3 copies of it now, Honorog's even played 4 in the main deck. And like the fact that that card is just here now, here to stay, is a sign that we need to recoup the cards we're pitching to all our forces.
I also think part of that is the incremental life gain just tacked onto everything now. It's like, hey, your Night Switcher should probably gain 3 life now if it's going to be playable. Like, why does everything just have life gain tacked onto it?
Yep. That question was probably rhetorical, but the answer is fire printing. Like, we want the casual pack purchaser to be only happy with their purchase. We want them to open a card like Oko that's like, man, I hate Chalice of the Void. It's an elk. Man, I hate Burn. Gain 3 life. Like, just that sort of thing. Like Richard Shea, the Atog Lord, has been on a rant about this. Well, before he quit Magic due to Magic being racist, he would constantly rant about how things aren't symmetrical anymore. Like a card that's like Karn the Great Creator. If it was printed in 2010, it would have said artifacts can't be activated.
Yes.
Not your opponent's artifacts.
Rich
Teferi would have been symmetrical. And it would make sense on the War of the Spark Planeswalkers if they just were symmetrical. Like, the way the cards are designed, like, if Teferi's static was symmetrical, nobody can cast instants, but his plus was, you can cast instants now. Like, that would make sense. He's on your team. He's doing a little work to, like, let you through his defensive magic. Narset Parter of Veils, if she said nobody can draw extra cards, but you can impulse twice, you continue gaining card advantage, even though players can't draw cards, like, it makes sense. They were so close, and then they were just one-sided for some reason.
We talked about that a few episodes ago with the hate bear printings, how they're all non-symmetrical now as well.
Yeah, like Lavinia being a tool that Paradoxical Outcome gets to use against the Force of Will decks, which are also playing Lavinia against the Paradoxical Outcome decks, is so goofy. I actually recorded a Pauper League this week with Goblin Storm featuring Brightstone Ritual, and I actually got paired against goblins in the league, and Brightstone Ritual makes a red for each goblin in play. So, like, yeah. So it had been a long time since I had plenty of situations where, like, my opponent died to an extra damage off True Name Nemesis because they had Lord of Atlantis, like in Old Legacy. But that just doesn't happen anymore. Like, the new Lord of Atlantis, whatever that card, Master of the Pearl Trident, is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same card, but not symmetrical. And that's just how cards are printed now.
The closest thing in, like, the modern era of Magic that actually sees plays, probably actually in Historic with Gem Palm Recruiter. Or Gem Palm Incinerator, I'm sorry, I said Recruiter.
Oh, yeah. Because that's an old card that just got reprinted. If they designed that today, it would not count their goblins. All right, we're on a boomer rant. We are deep into a legacy boomer rant right now. Do we have anything else to say about the cost of casting cantrips or tutors, the cost of card selection, or do we want to just tell people to register Dreadhorde Arcanist, Oko, and Uro until they ban some number of them?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously we've been telling people that for a while, off and on, but they probably get that. So let's end on a new nugget.
I thought we were on a good tangent rant there. I was really enjoying myself.
Yeah, but I'm trying to rein it in. We are approaching the hour and 52 minutes mark. It's right about that time where we should put a pin in this. And some of us have to be up for work in the morning for the first time in 2 months.
Enjoy waking up at 5, Brian.
I won't, but thank you.
Here's your closing nugget. So if you are a deck builder or a deck tuner, give tempo in regards to cantripping and tutoring and your curve a little bit more thought than you've been giving it previously. Because the legacy of this year is very different from the legacy of last year, which is very different from the 10 years that preceded it, or whatever, however long legacy has been around for. And things are constantly changing, and you need to be adapting. You need to be thinking about your heuristics and your deck building if you want to keep up and you want to be at the absolute cutting edge of the format.
What's tempo?
It's card advantage.
Fuck, cut off the recording. Cut off the recording.
Record
Otherwise,
scratches.
it's just like a giant tangent.